My name is Otis Kane, and I turned 33 years old, sitting at my mother's dining room table in Asheville, North Carolina. The candles hadn't even been lit yet when my mother leaned toward my father and whispered just loud enough for me to catch every word. "Since everyone's here, tell your son to change the locks at her place." Her place. Mine. The condo I bought with my own paycheck. The condo where my 8-year-old son does his homework at the kitchen counter. My father nodded without lifting his eyes from his plate. My brother Trent set down his fork, mumbled something about a work call, and walked out jingling his keys. Everyone else kept passing the green beans like nothing had happened. I smiled and asked for the recipe for the cornbread. 1 hour later, Trent came back through that front door with a face the color of old dishwater, bent down to our mother's ear, and whispered, "Mom, he never finished the sentence. Here's what nobody at that table knew. I already understood exactly what was waiting for him in my parking lot, because I had spent 6 weeks quietly building it. Ever since a declined debit card at a pharmacy register sent me pulling a thread that ended inside a folder in my mother's china cabinet. A folder that showed me what my parents had been doing to me for 11 years. Let me take you back 6 weeks. Before all this, my life was small, and it was good, and it was mine. I work night shifts in the emergency department at Blue Ridge Regional, which means I've learned to keep my voice steady while machines are screaming. 12-hour shifts. Then home to my condo in Sycamore Row, 20 minutes from the house I grew up in. I bought that condo 4 years ago, and I remember exactly what it felt like turning that key for the first time. 29 years old. And it was the first door in my whole life that belonged only to me. My son Micah was 8 that summer, all knees and questions, learning to land a skateboard trick in the parking lot while my neighbor Gus hollered encouragement from his porch. Gus Ferraro is 71, a retired sheriff's deputy with almost 3 decades on the job, a rocking chair that never stops creaking, and an old bloodhound named Otis who supervises the entire building. Every Sunday, I drove across town for family dinner, because Sunday dinner was written on my mother's calendar in permanent ink. And things on my mother's calendar happened whether you wanted them to or not. That week, she called me twice about my birthday. "We're doing something special this year. Honey, just family." There was a sweetness in her voice I hadn't heard directed at me since I was a little girl. I stood at my kitchen counter, frowning at nothing, because my mother had not thrown me a birthday dinner since I turned 13. I told myself people mellow with age. I told myself 62 does that to a woman. Then I finished the dishes, checked on Micah, and folded the thought away like a shirt I knew I'd never wear again. 2 days later, a card reader at the pharmacy would unfold it for me whether I liked it or not. You should understand what my role in this family actually was, because it was never simply daughter. I was the fixer. At 15, I was reading the electric bill out loud at the kitchen table because my father said the print was too small. At 18, I filed my parents' taxes for the first time. And every spring after that, I sorted my father's blood pressure medication into a little plastic organizer. When the water heater died, when the car insurance lapsed, when Trent's landlord threatened eviction, my phone was the one that rang. My mother had a phrase for it. Delivered like a blessing every single time. That's just what family does. Looking back, I can count maybe 3 occasions in my life when that sentence arrived without a favor riding along behind it. Here's the part I'm still ashamed to admit. I handled everyone's paperwork except my own. When I turned 18, my father set up a small fireproof lockbox in his study and told me he'd keep my important documents safe there. Birth certificate, Social Security card, a savings bond from my grandmother. It felt like being cared for. I was a scholarship kid, working diner shifts through nursing school. And I liked believing somebody else was minding the deep paperwork so I could focus on surviving. I paid my rent, then my mortgage, always on time through my little local credit union. And I never once pulled my own credit report. I know how that sounds coming from a woman who reads vital signs for a living. But you don't audit the people who taught you to ride a bike. You just keep showing up on Sundays, passing the green beans, filing their taxes. It took 11 years to learn what else lived inside that lockbox besides my birth certificate. It took one declined debit card to start that lesson. It happened at a pharmacy on a Thursday afternoon. Micah had an ear infection. I had his medicine in one hand and my card in the other. And the little screen flashed, declined in gray letters. I ran it again. Declined. My backup card came back with suspected fraud. Call your bank. There was a line behind me. A teenager buying energy drinks. An elderly man leaning on a cane. All of them politely studying the candy rack while my face burned. I paid with crumpled bills from the bottom of my purse, got Micah's medicine, and sat in my car doing the thing I do at work when a monitor starts shrieking. Slow breath. Look at the numbers. That night, after Micah was asleep, I finally signed up for one of those free credit monitoring apps I'd been putting off for years. It loaded my file, and I sat there reading my own name like it belonged to a stranger. There was a credit card on my report opened 3 years earlier. I have never applied for that card in my life. Balance just over $5,000. Status: 60 days past due. That single delinquent account had dragged my score off a cliff. Which is exactly why an emergency room nurse with a spotless payment history had just been humiliated over an $11 prescription. My hands stayed steady. I want that on the record. Years in an ER will do that for you. I clicked into the account details expecting some stranger's address in another state. The billing address was a house on Larkspur Lane in Asheville. A house I know better than my own hands. I grew up in it. I did what you're supposed to do. In the order you're supposed to do it. I called the bank, sat through hold music, and told the fraud department the account wasn't mine. I placed a fraud alert on my file and asked for copies of the original application. The representative was kind and thorough, and near the end, she read me the phone number listed on the account. Just to confirm, it wasn't my number. It was a landline. I could have recited it in my sleep, because it had been my parents' kitchen phone since before I could drive. I thanked her in my calm nurse voice and hung up, staring at my own reflection in the dark microwave door. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't touched in years. When I was 26, a few months after Micah was born, I received a letter about a credit inquiry I didn't recognize. I brought it to my parents' house, set it on the kitchen table, and my father chuckled and pulled a folded page from his study. Bank letterhead. An apology. Something about a clerical error already resolved. My mother patted my hand. Bank mistake. Sweetheart, your father already took care of it. Go worry about the baby. The alert I'd set expired on its own 90 days later. The way they always do. I remembered thinking the letter had looked slightly off. The paper too bright. The logo a shade too blue. Then the baby cried, and I let it go. Sitting in my kitchen years later, I finally let myself finish that thought. That weekend, my neighbor Gus was out front fixing a fence latch the homeowners association had been ignoring since spring. Because Gus fixes things the way other men watch football. I held the gate steady while he worked, and Otis lay in the grass supervising us both. He told me a story from his deputy days about a forgery case where a man's own relative had signed his name better than he could himself. 30 years on the job taught me one thing. Kid, he said, tightening the last screw. Paper never lies. People do. I came within one breath of telling him everything right there at that fence. I had the sentence loaded. But I've been the strong one for so long that asking for help feels like undressing in public. Since my divorce, my whole world had narrowed down to Micah, my job, and this parking lot. And I'd gotten used to carrying things alone. So I said something about the weather instead. My phone rang while Gus was still holding the screwdriver. My mother's voice came through bright as a bell. "You're still free for your birthday dinner, aren't you?" Oh, wait. We moved it to Wednesday. Did I tell you she had not told me? She talked for 4 more minutes about a cake from a bakery downtown. About an aunt flying in. About family being together. And I stood there, feeling the hair rise on my arms. My mother had not acknowledged my birthday with so much as a card in over 20 years. Now she was calling twice a week about a cake. That Sunday night I had a shift. And emergency rooms have quiet hours if you're lucky. The kind where the monitors hum and the coffee goes cold. I used my break to request my full credit reports from all 3 bureaus. The real ones. I read about 40 pages at 2 in the morning the way I read a chart on a crashing patient. Fast first. Then slow. It was worse than one card. There was an account opened when I was 22. Another 2 years later. A store card after that. A personal loan for $12,000. Paid off and closed. Then 2 more cards in later years. 8 accounts total. 11 years of history. None of it mine. All of it wearing my name like a borrowed coat. I made a list with the pens I use for charting. And the dates lined up into a shape I didn't want to see. The first card was opened the same month I graduated nursing school and moved my boxes out of my parents' house. Somebody had waited for me to leave and then opened a door behind me with my own name on it. Over the next few days, I turned my kitchen table into a caseboard. Every account got a row. Opened when. Balance what. Status which. The totals came out cold and specific. The way I like numbers. Just over $22,000 in open balances currently rotting under my name. And one detail, repeated down the page like a heartbeat. Every account listed the same mailing address for statements. Not my condo. The house on Larkspur Lane. For 11 years. Every bill. Every late notice. Had been delivered to my childhood bedroom where I couldn't see it and somebody else could. The credit inquiry when I was 26 hadn't been an error. It had been a near miss. I sat with a legal pad and wrote down the only 2 names that fit every fact. Who had my social security number since birth? Who kept my documents in a lockbox? Who controlled the mailbox on Larkspur Lane? Who answered that old landline? I wrote the names. Then scratched them out. Then wrote them again. And my hand was not steady that second time. My parents. It was the personal loan that stopped me cold. $12,000 opened and paid off in a single tidy year. The kind of loan that builds credit. I stood at my closet door, where I'd started taping a timeline so my son wouldn't see it, trying to place that year. And then I didn't have to try anymore. Micah was born that same spring. I spent that month in a hospital bed with a blood pressure cuff on my arm and a preeclampsia diagnosis on my chart, being told not to stand up too fast. While I was learning to nurse my newborn son, somebody was signing my name across town for $12,000. That week's family dinner was a masterclass, and I attended it like an anthropologist. My mother ran the table the way she runs everything, conducting forks and conversation with the same wrist. Extra rolls for my father. A warmed plate for Trent, who came in late in his work boots and got served without asking. My mother asked about my shifts in a way that wasn't really asking. Mentioned the condo was so far from family, which is a strange thing to call 20 minutes. And reminded everyone the bakery needed the final head count for my cake. Toward the end, I mentioned, easy as anything, that some of my mail had been going to their house by mistake. Old habits from college. And could they just hand it over unopened from now on? The table did a small, pull it freeze. Family doesn't need permission, my mother said, and speared a green bean. Not an apology. A policy statement. On my way to the kitchen with the dishes, I passed the china cabinet and saw a manila folder lying flat under the good napkins. One corner sticking out. Soft from handling. I had my hand on the cabinet door when my mother appeared beside me and closed it smooth as a curtain. "Those napkins are for the holidays," she said. It was the middle of summer. The birthday planning got stranger after that. My mother called midweek to confirm the new date, then pivoted mid-sentence into a detour I've replayed 100 times since. "You still keep your important papers in that little fireproof box, don't you? The gray one." I said something non-committal. She pressed. "Light as powdered sugar. With you working nights and nobody home, papers should be locked up somewhere safe. Does anyone check on the place while you're gone?" I told her Gus kept an eye on things. "That old man with the dog," she said, waving it off. Then she offered, generous as royalty, to take Micah overnight the night of my party so I could relax. Every cell in my body that has ever run a code went quiet and cold at once. I told her Micah already had a sleepover planned with a friend's kids, which wasn't true yet, but became true one phone call later. I wrote 3 note cards for my closet wall. 1. She asked about the lockbox. 2. She asked who watches my condo. 3. She wants Micah out of my apartment on Wednesday night. The next morning, instead of sleeping after my shift, I drove downtown to the county recorder's office with a cup of coffee and a hunch. The clerk handed me the answer for $2 in copying fees. It was a power of attorney. General. Durable. Financial. Granting my parents full authority over my accounts, loans, and property. Signed and notarized on a date I recognized instantly, because I was admitted to the hospital that same week with preeclampsia. On the day someone swore I stood before a notary signing away my financial life, I couldn't stand up at all. The second witness line on that document had gone through a bad photocopier years ago, and the signature there had smeared into an unreadable ghost. I paid for 3 certified copies and went home with that fact burning at the top of my timeline. I called my own credit union to make sure my actual mortgage was safe. And the loan officer, a kind man named Marv, who keeps butterscotch candies on his desk, reassured me everything was current and clean. Then, because small credit unions are chatty, he added one more thing. Funny timing. Though, we got a verification request on your property last month from another lender. I didn't recognize the outfit. Underwriting is a word from the present tense. Somewhere out there, a lender I'd never heard of was actively checking what my condo was worth and what was owed on it, which happens for exactly one reason. Something new was being built in my name, and it wasn't finished yet. My neighbor Gus came to me before I went to him, which tells you everything about Gus. He knocked 2 sharp knocks and stood on my mat with Otis and a look I recognized from work. Bad news delivered carefully. There's a gray sedan been through the lot twice this week, he said. Fella in it took pictures of your door. Both doors, front and back. I asked how he knew it wasn't just the building, because I watched him line up the shot on your lock specifically. Kid, he said. He'd written the plate number on the back of a receipt out of habit. The way other men hum. A quick call to an old friend still on the force traced it to a locksmith company with a commercial account. The last family dinner before my birthday was the sweetest one in years. And that's how I knew we were close to something. The cake was ordered. 3 layers. Lemon. An aunt confirmed for the weekend. My brother Trent showed up on time for once in a freshly washed truck, bragging about how well it ran now that the loan was finally paid off. My mother smiled into her plate, and the comment rolled by like weather. I filed it anyway. The moment that mattered came from Micah, coloring quietly at the end of the table, who looked up at my mother with the flat candor of an 8-year-old and asked, "Grandma, why do you have a key to my house?" The table went quiet half a beat too long. My mother laughed, her hostess laugh, and ruffled his hair. Family doesn't need permission. Sweetheart, the second time I'd heard that policy, driving home, it was the key itself I kept turning over. She did have one. From years ago when she'd helped me hang curtains. What she didn't know was that I'd rekeyed both doors after my divorce. And the key in her junk drawer opened nothing at all. I stayed late to help with dishes. And for a few minutes, I was alone in the dining room with the china cabinet. I opened it. And I looked. Because by then I had earned the looking. The folder was soft at the corners. Opened 100 times. And inside was my name. Page after page of ruled paper. One signature practiced over and over. The early pages were clumsy. The loops too fat. By the last pages, it was flawless. Smoother than my own real handwriting. Someone had trained. Underneath the practice sheets were bank statements bearing a different name entirely. My grandmother's. Statements from her last 2 years alive. I heard the porch door begin to slide open and photographed everything my phone could hold before closing the cabinet. The next morning, I filed an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission, choosing both parents from the relationship drop-down menu because that's what the truth required. I scheduled an appointment with the local police department's financial crimes unit. I emptied my real fireproof lockbox of every genuine document and moved them to a safe deposit box downtown, replacing everything at home with expired coupons and blank paper. If someone came looking for my paper life, they would find exactly what they'd earned. Nothing. Detective Renata Cole turned out to be a compact woman with reading glasses on a chain and a handshake like a door closing. She read my binder for 20 minutes without speaking. Her first question wasn't about my parents. Who else has copies? A bank vault. I told her. She nodded once. The way I nod when a new nurse hands me a chart done right. Days later, she called with the piece that changed everything. There's a home equity loan in underwriting at a regional lender right now. She said, borrower of record. Your name. Collateral. Your condo. Application signed under that power of attorney. The amount was just under $100,000. And it was scheduled to close and fund that Friday. The same morning my mother had mentioned, almost in passing, that my father had a little bank appointment. We let it look alive. Detective Cole said, frozen solid from the inside. But nothing about it will look frozen from the outside. I found one more thing in those photographs before I could stop myself. Hidden beneath my grandmother's statements. A foreclosure notice from years earlier. Tied to my father's small print shop. And behind it a handwritten draft of a desperate letter to the bank. Crossed out and rewritten in his blocky pencil. Begging for any terms that would let them keep the house. In the margin, in my mother's handwriting. Small and final as a stamp stop begging. I'll handle it. I understood then that in some year I hadn't lived through yet. My mother had stepped over my father's shame and taken the family books. And he had been so relieved to be spared the humiliation that he never questioned how she handled anything again. Shame explains the first signature. It doesn't explain the next decade of them, the night before my birthday. My father came to my condo alone for the first time in years, carrying a small box of screws for a shelf I'd mentioned months earlier. His eyes kept sliding to my new deadbolt. Obviously fresh. Brushed nickel. Locks wear out. I said. He nodded at it like it was a dog that might bite. You always were the careful one, he said. And for 2 seconds something moved behind his face. Something almost like a warning trying to find a way out. It never found one, on my birthday. I made pancakes. I watched my son do his first full skateboard lap without falling, and packed his overnight bag for a sleepover that had, by then, become entirely real. I hugged him longer than the occasion called for. At my mother's house that evening, the table was staged beautifully. The good plates out. Candles waiting in their box. My mother gave a toast about family being the only thing that lasts. About everything I had coming from this family. I raised my glass with everyone else and drank it down. Because only 2 people at that table knew what the sentence actually meant. Between the roast and the cake, My phone buzzed once. A message from Detective Cole. 2 photographs. The first was the notarized power of attorney. The smeared signature finally resolved from the notary's retained file. Witness number 2. In a slanting hand I would have known anywhere. Was my brother Trent's. The second was a loan payoff record from the very week I'd been hospitalized. An $11,000 truck loan settled in full, 9 days after that notary date. Paid by my parents. My brother, who had carried me across a creek at summer camp because I was afraid of the water, had sold his signature on my life for a truck payment. I excused myself, washed my hands, and came back to the table smiling. That's when my mother leaned toward my father and murmured, low enough that she thought only he could hear. Since everyone's here, have your son change the locks at her place. My father gave the smallest nod I have ever seen a grown man produce. My brother stood, mumbled something about a work call, and left with his keys. I ate my cake. I told my aunt it was the best lemon cake the bakery had ever made. And I meant it. When Trent came back through that door an hour later, his face had gone the color of old dishwater. There were police at my building. They'd stopped the locksmith in the parking lot. They had paperwork. They knew my name the moment he stepped out of his truck. Mom. He never finished. The room went silent in the particular way a family goes silent right before it breaks. My mother stood so fast her chair barked against the floor. What did you do? She said, rising through the octaves until the hostess voice burned off completely, revealing what had been underneath it the entire time. Everything I have done for this family, she said, and I stayed in my chair, hands folded on my napkin, and used the voice I use at 2 a.m. when a family is screaming at a monitor. The one that doesn't need to rise because it doesn't need to. You're right. Mom, I said. Even the debt. I slid 1 page across the tablecloth. A credit inquiry run 5 weeks earlier on an 8-year-old boy. My aunt read her great-nephew's name and age and set the page down like it was hot. My father, gray around the lips, both hands flat on the table as if bracing something that wasn't moving, said the only fully honest sentence I ever heard him speak in my life. She's telling the truth. All of it. I stood, collected my purse, and took the rest of the lemon cake off the counter on my way out. Because I'd bought my own birthday cake once, as a child with babysitting money. And tonight I was simply taking back what was already mine. In the weeks that followed, justice moved the way it actually moves. On paper. At printer speed. Charges were filed against both my parents. My brother came in with a lawyer, told investigators everything, and became a cooperating witness, which bought him a lighter charge and a debt no court will ever be able to schedule. The nearly $100,000 loan never funded. My condo's title stayed clean. Every fraudulent account came off my name. 1 deletion letter at a time. 3 months later, on an ordinary Saturday morning, my whole world fit inside 1 parking lot. And it was enough. Micah did skateboard laps around the lampposts while Gus called out times he was clearly inventing. And Otis refereed from the grass. My mail comes to 1 address now. Mine. I open every envelope the day it arrives. Which sounds small unless you've lived through something like this. In which case you know it's the whole prize. My aunt calls every Sunday. And mostly we talk about nothing important, which is its own kind of medicine. My brother texted me an apology in early autumn. Long and careful. I read the whole thing standing at my counter. And I haven't answered. And I haven't blocked him either. Some doors you don't slam. You just stop oiling the hinges. I told my son the truth, in a size he could carry. Grandma did something dishonest with Mommy's name. And none of it, not 1 bit, was his fault. He thought about it for a day, asked if Otis could come to his birthday party, and moved on. Because 8-year-olds have perfect instincts for what actually matters. His credit stays frozen until he's grown. My grandmother's old savings bond hangs framed above my desk now. Not for the money, but for the signature, hers, and only hers, on her own paper. I used to think love meant handing people your keys and hoping for the best. Now I know love is the one thing in this world that never needs to practice your signature. If this story reminded you to pull your own credit report, or to freeze your child's, take that as your sign to do it today. And if you've ever sat at a table smiling at people who were quietly taking everything from you, tell me in the comments how long you carried that silence before you finally set it down.